We're here with Christopher DiCarlo, a professor of philosophy of science and ethics. He teaches in the human biology program and philosophy department at the University of Toronto in Canada, and he submitted an article to a special issue of IEEE Technology and Society magazine on how to avoid a robotic apocalypse. Christopher DiCarlo is a philosopher, educator, and consultant, and he teaches in many different aspects. And I've been very interested this morning in reading up on his critical thinking solutions and approaches to critical thinking, which I think are vital for society at large. Christopher, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
I was looking at one of your YouTubes this morning on the importance of universal ethics and the universality of ethics.
Right.
And I think that talk dovetailed very much into your paper. Tell us a little bit about the motivation to writing How to Avoid a Robotic Apocalypse.
Right. I read some material on what was happening in AI. I've always been interested in AI. I did my postdoc at Harvard, so I would buzz over to MIT just down the road and see what they were up to. And, always been a huge fan of science fiction, as I imagine a lot of us geeks are, right? I mean, it's very interesting stuff. But as a philosopher, I wasn't convinced that the right questions were necessarily being asked in advance, right? And it's that whole kind of Jurassic Park, idea of your scientists were so busy about whether or not they could do this technology, did they stop to think about whether or not they should? And that's where the philosophers, if they're good, and the majority of them are bad, I'll just go on online and say that there are a lot of bad philosophers out there, but there are some very good ones as well. And they're the ones, I think, who ask the right types of questions. And those are the questions like, what are we prepared for?
Yes.
And since my postdoc work at Harvard was in emergent consciousness and cognitive evolution, it wasn't in philosophy. I consider myself an interdisciplinarian. I don't really call myself a philosopher anymore, but I studied a great deal about what would have led, what were the factors involved, the constraints involved in the evolution of language, the coevolution of language and consciousness with humans. And it seems to have been a bit of a perfect storm, and it seems to have happened relatively recently. I mean, consciousness in terms of full apperception, full meta-awareness, fully cognizant of yourself as a being in the world, what Heidegger called a being in the world, and knowing that you are part of a particular ecological system, and that you can affect change on that system. Since we moved through various evolutionary constraints, the two macro programs of which are sex and survival.
Yes.
What might happen when an artificial intelligence develops a sense of itself, a sense of consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anyone can say for sure. I don't think we can say, oh, it'll be just like us. We don't know. We don't know that. We don't know if AI consciousness will want to survive. It might be just okay with being shut off, right? One of the thought experiments I do with my students is I say, I'm going to fly you down to MIT and we're going to take you into the language lab or whatever. We'll take you into one of the labs down there. And you're going to be working away one night on a system, on a computer, just like you have at home. And you're tapped into the main hub, the central hub of the research that's going on there. And before you log off, the computer says, don't. What do you do? And they say, well, I wouldn't want to log off. Why? Well, because it's alive. How do you know? How do you know it's not a program mimicking that? What will we have? What Turing test are we going to have in advance? Or, in Blade Runner, they called it a Voight-Kampff test to determine who's a human and who's an android. What equipment are we going to have to be able to make the determinations that consciousness has emerged in an artificially intelligent system? Because if we haven't figured that out yet, what are we going to do should it happen? And I think it's just a matter of time that it will happen. It was a matter of time for us We know what caused it in us. We can mimic that. We can put in all of the kinds of constraints and parameters and variables we want in the hopes that an emergent property like apperception or consciousness does arise. Should we have indication of that, where are we going to go from there? And let's say we can make a determination where enough scholars in the world, enough experts in the field say, yeah, this thing's passed all Turing tests. It really does appear to be an individual. It does have a sense of its own existence, right? And what if it says, don't shut me down? I'd rather continue than not continue. Now we have to talk about rights. Now we have to talk about, the ethics of AI, and we have to seriously think about who then has the right to shut this thing off, and why would we want to? Obviously, if there's a threat to humanity in any kind of way, we would want to control for that. But then you've got like Asimov's 3 laws, which I think this thing will usurp in a heartbeat if it does want to survive. Because if it needs to defend itself, we, as evolutionary creatures who have evolved through various types of mechanisms and constraints, we have a sense of our own survival, of our own finitude, of our own demise, and all these types of things. And we have concepts about afterlives and things like that. But I don't know if you're going to have an AI, having a religion, having a God, having a belief that, even if all my circuitry is burnt out, some element of myself will continue on, or somebody somehow will be able to preserve it so that I can come back again, in some way. So there's so many questions we need to ask ourselves now in terms of getting ready for this. And I know some have. I know, Hawking and Musk and a bunch of others have gotten together and said, what are we prepared to do? And their fear, of course, is the Frankenstein effect, that this AI is going to become so powerful and it can move so much quicker than we can in terms of processing speed and all that kind of stuff, that it'll be 10 steps ahead of us stupid, clumsy humans fumbling along, trying to catch up to it. So that's why in the paper I introduced the Lysine effect, right? That we have to think about the possibility that if the consciousness emerges and it operates so quickly in terms of its survival capacity that we haven't fully prepared for this kind of contingency, we need a Lysine effect built in so that we have the capacity to shut it down, arguably, in case it kicks into high gear and really figures out how it can protect itself. And I'm not talking about Terminator scenarios or things like that. I'm just talking about its processing speed is just so much quicker than ours. If it's one step ahead of us and then can exploit the constraints operating on it at any given time, we need to be a couple of steps ahead of it to put up firewalls or brakes or whatever that can somehow contain it without necessarily ending its existence as an entity, as a conscious entity. Because let's face it, should that occur in our lifetimes, that's probably going to be one of the greatest things that's ever happened to humanity. Outside of aliens coming down and hanging out with us, having AI become sentient and conscious is a game changer for sure. And as a philosopher of science and an interdisciplinarian, I just don't know if all of the ducks are in a row at this point. And if not, don't you think we need to talk about this stuff? Right?
I think that's very critical indeed. I was just pondering on driverless cars that may inherit a type of AI consciousness, and thinking about they're so smart out there. They're, imagine it's the taxi industry, and we've got Uber driverless cars going around in Toronto, and they anticipate there's a global downturn, so people start walking, they start not to be spending on taxis, so they let themselves out and about to tell the Uber executives, we're still useful and you're not going to decommission us, and we're still out there picking up sort of customers that don't exist. It's that kind of scenario, demand and supply, that I often think about with respect to this. But I think your tangible, practical examples, which I think Hal showed us in 2001, when David said, open the pod bay doors, Hal, And he said, I'm not going to do that, and I know you can't do it either.
I'm afraid I can't do that.
So these scenarios are powerful.
They are. They are. And do your colleagues discuss these at all?
I think our computer scientists certainly do. But there are incremental innovations occurring in various spaces. There's converging disciplines now. I know you're very big on that, and I too believe that that's what's sparking the new discoveries. I mean, Michio Kaku talks about this interdisciplinarity and this changing, quantum change. And some of your talks actually ring a bell to me. They remind me of the Q Symposium in Australia, which is led out of the University of Sydney in one of their international relations groups. And they bring think tanks from all over the world to talk about complex systems. They talk about what if these things take consciousness, but also how do you solve complex problems. And so all areas of interest seem to very much integrate with that group from Sydney Uni. If you look up the Q Symposium, you'll be very interested. I think it goes very close to one of your major projects.
Oh, would you be able to send me a link?
Sure can, yes.
That? Oh,
so qsymposium.net from memory.
Okay.
And there are great talks. They don't all focus on AI. They focus on quantum change and the Q effect.
Yeah.
But I was thinking if you could talk to us more about how those things are not aligning at the moment, that we need to have more dialogue, and what kinds of forms of dialogue might that take? What are you brainstorming about?
Right. One of the things that I'm really interested in that the symposium you mentioned might find appealing. I don't know if you realize anything about Canadian politics. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but we have a new Prime Minister. We have a pretty boy named Justin Trudeau. And he's Pierre Trudeau's son. Arguably, Pierre was the best Canadian Prime Minister. Some will disagree with me, but I thought he was pretty good. He was a philosopher, right? He was an interesting guy. I don't know if his son can hold a candle to him or not. But anyhow, his son wants to reform the Senate. I'm not sure what the political system is down there, but we have, the two houses. We have the members of Parliament, and then we have the upper chamber, or the Senate, the second, the sober second consideration of bills and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, Trudeau wants to reform the Senate. So I've been meeting with our MP here to get a meeting with Trudeau to propose something I have called LBIS, or LBIS, a least biased information system. I want to create a fair machine. I want to create a hub of information that filters out unnecessary information, that focuses on what is important in the development of policies, social, domestic, foreign, so that the members of Parliament and the senators are informed to the best possible manner, in the least biased manner. So I call it the Fair Machine Project, and what I'm trying to do is consider whether or not, I want to start with the humanities, believe it or not. I want to start with the humanities, with philosophy, economics, psych, bring in some of the social sciences, and have conversations, first of all, is such a machine possible? And if it were, how would we go about building a machine that gave us the best information we have available to us, whether we like it or not, whether it appeals to our political ideologies or not? Don't you think it behooves us as humans, where we have technology at our beck and whim, to be able to use, that can think and give us information far, far faster than any humans are capable of figuring out? We can't. We're very, very limited in our gray matter and our capacities, to think about this. So let the machine not necessarily make decisions, but let the machine run through its simulations based on the information that has been agreed upon by all parties as being the fairest, least biased. And then whatever suggestions the machine makes, that gets dropped on the floor, as it were, and then the parliamentarians can now discuss it. You see, we take out all that messy stuff of getting to that point. And so I just thought, why are we leaving this up to stupid humans who squabble about individual ideological differences? If what we care about is the polis, and we're supposed to care about the polis, And if we're supposed to care about environmental issues and other species, and we have to take all of these things into consideration, those parameters and constraints are far too, the magnitude is far too great for any one human to be able to sit there like Solomon and make these decisions. We can't have that. We have the technology that could greatly assist us in jumping over those hurdles that take forever in trying to come up with what information should be inclusive and what shouldn't. Let's create a machine that does all that for us. Again, your knowledge of Canadian politics, I have no idea what it is, but here we have, we're natural resources. Canada is all about natural resources. Ontario is about manufacturing, right? We're essentially just a big-ass country with a lot of stuff in it, a lot of raw stuff in it. And one of those things is oil. And in Alberta, we got a lot of oil. But it's in sand. It's not the pure stuff you would get out of Texas. It's called tar sands. And what they do is they can ship it. They treat it in a particular way, and it's called bitumen, and it can be shipped. Now here's the deal: the environmentalists are going crazy because they don't want this stuff shipped in a pipeline. And Obama, I think, went against one of the pipeline proposals that our last prime minister had. But when you carefully look at the data, and you don't need a fair machine to do this, but it wouldn't hurt to have a machine consider the constraints much more than humans can. When you look at probability of environmental degradation, pipelines generally are the least damaging, ships are pretty bad, and rail is often very bad. So if we're going to continue to use oil, because you can claim all you want, we got to get off oil, fine. I gotta give a talk in Vancouver in 4 days. You want me to start walking now or get on my bike? That's not going to happen. So let's be realistic and let's be fair. We all use oil. We couldn't have this conversation if it were not for oil or some type of energy product that allows us to be able to do this. So I'm all for getting off oil, but in the meantime, let's not be silly about it. Let's figure out the best way to use oil as we're going through a transitional stage. And that's how I think a fair machine may be brought to the table within parliaments or governments throughout the world, so that the machine itself can do the really hard legwork of fact-finding and putting information out there, so that people are better informed, so that the decisions they do eventually make, they can say, oh, even though I'm an environmentalist, it looks like shipping this stuff through a big tube turns out to be the safest way. I thought it was the worst way. But when you show somebody the facts, hopefully, right, we can, in terms of critical thinking, when you have the facts there, you can make a more knowledgeable, more informed decision about these important things that are going to affect the rest of the country. So that's how I see, how I would like to use AI in terms of, you know, the development of what I call least biased information systems. And don't forget, no matter what political party you belong to, it would be very difficult for any member of any party to say, no, I don't agree with fairness. I don't, right? Because in order to say that, you then force their hand and say, why is unfairness a good thing? Why should we not have information that gives us the fairest, best account of the information that we require in order to make these decisions, right? So, to me, fairness as a virtue in ethics is one of the highest that people tend to admire. You would rarely have anybody say, no, fairness is overrated, or, you know, you can talk about love, truth, beauty, you can talk about all the virtues in the world you want, and people could have issues with them. But fairness, you generally get the most amount of agreement. Now, of course, they're going to say fairness for whom? How are we going to make that determination? That's why we have to start with the humanities and the social sciences. We have to figure out, what are humans even capable of,
Yes.
right? We know we're selfish. We know we're selfish individuals. But why not use that to our advantage? You had mentioned the smart cars, the cars that drive themselves. I've been meeting with the Ministry of the Transportation of Ontario, because I've come up with a basic system that actually draws on John Nash. Do you remember Nash? He was a beautiful mind. I'm drawing on his algorithms for murmuration. I don't know if you've ever seen birds in flight, like
Yes,
thousands
I
of
have.
birds flying
Very
around, but
beautiful.
they never hit each
Yep.
other,
Yep.
right? So Nash figured out what the algorithms were that allow the birds to
Yeah.
do that. So I've taken those and I'm applying them to traffic congestion, and there's just three basic principles. And so the Ministry of Transportation is now considering that. But it requires that humans cooperate in their selfishness. I want to get from A to B as quickly and in as best time as possible. Fine, you need to follow these three rules. And if you do, and the guy next to you, and the woman in front of you, and the person behind you, if they all follow those, guess what? We all shave time off of our commute. You cheat, right? You get a bird in murmuration cheating. The other birds are, he's going to hit. It's going to hit other birds, and it's going to mess up the whole system. So I think we have to play into people's natural tendencies to be selfish, but to do it collectively, so that in a collaborative effort we can realize, I'm going to give up a little bit of liberty, right? I can't just drive up as close as I want to the next person in front of me. I can't weave in and out of traffic because I'm frustrated, right? I have to give up all those little liberties. But if I follow these three basic algorithmic principles, everybody will move through this bottleneck as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I think humans can be taught this. I think if you show them and you demonstrate it over and over and over again, if we're team players and if we're all in this together and if we all cooperate, we will all get more of what we want. But that's so difficult to try to get through to people because they're kind of stuck in that individualized selfish mode rather than the collective selfish mode. Right?
And we've been seeing some of these very fundamental practices which are enforceable in some nations. Look at, for example, when you can drive your automobile into the city, and it's based on number plates, for example, and what they begin with. And a few people have tried to cheat the system, but now there are these things called automatic number plate recognition systems that can catch you out fairly easily. And yet still we seem as humans to require that enforceability metric that says you shall be fined if you do not comply.
That's right. The carrot and the stick, right?
And I mean, a lot of what you're talking about, a fairness machine which didn't have subjective values laden in it would be great, because programmers, as we know, are humans. They may not be in the future, but they come imbued with their own subjectivity, their own biases, their own cultural dependencies, ideologies, and so forth. So a fair machine may not be within our reach if, I guess, we create it. And then I'm actually worried, to some degree, if I think back to our AI discussion, what happens if the fair machine doesn't just have constraint programming, but has an AI consciousness of some sort that says, actually, I'm going to put electricity first because electricity means I get to survive. There are so many beautiful things that you said, though, that I think, for me, I take away, and I heard in the talk this morning, I think it was in ESCATON 2012, it was this notion of cooperation. It was this notion that you mentioned as fairness, and no one likes to be ripped off, you said in your talk online, and I agree with you. And how do we do that without changing our whole legal system? And it would be great if we just could see a good example of someone and say, well, I'll mimic that. As again, you know, mimicking is a great practice. What are some of the ways you think humans will become perhaps less selfish or more cooperative? I should actually state the positive, more cooperative. What is it, do you think, Christopher, that will take us down that path as a humanity, and not just within, say, the more developed nations, but developing with developed nations? How does that happen?
The strongest way are the effects, right? If people can see results and they get it, they tend to cooperate more. About, 15 years ago, we had a mandatory seatbelt law, and people complained about it and said, "You're violating my liberty to ride the way I want to do. I've done this my whole life. What's the big deal?" See, my system, my approach to transportation systems and trying to get people to cooperate isn't simply, we're going to tell them what to do, and if you do it, you'll be better off, and if you don't do it, we're going to punish you. I also think we need to have PSAs. We have to have public service announcements, which literally educate, which literally show people, hey, have you noticed your commute to work for the last 50 years has always been the same every Monday to every Friday, and it's only getting worse because there's more people going into larger urban areas. The only way we can make it better is if we make more roads, or if we have tolls, or if we do this or that, or we have this new way, we have this new approach. And then we can use all kinds of analogies. At the Ministry of Transportation, this one person said, we use the rice analogy. We get a funnel and a tube, and we try to pour a bag of rice into the funnel, and it just gets stuck there. But when we pour it kind of gradually and slowly, all of the rice goes through. So you have to speak to people's capacities to understand, and analogical reasoning is a very good approach in that sense. Oh, we're just like the grains of rice. Oh, I get it.
Yes.
And then I wanted to do a pilot project so that we just take a week on one of our main highways outside of Toronto, and we run this thing. And I'm not saying mine is the be-all and the end-all. There are other people far brighter than me that just deal with these issues, and I'd like to collaborate with them to see if, along with my 3 algorithmic principles and the way in which I have it set up in the public service announcements, whatever it is they might want to add with it. Like, you know what, if we put tolls here, that would be enough of a buffer, you know what I mean, to start the process after the tolls begin, so that we'll get through. So it could be a combination of a bunch of different things. But if you show results where a person, like if I want to get to Toronto for a 9 a.m. class from where I am now, in Guelph, which is 86 kilometers from the heart of downtown Toronto, if I want to get downtown Toronto for 9 o'clock, I can't leave here much later than 6:30. Right? So I got to give 2.5 hours of my time to get to downtown Toronto. You know, and if I'm 6:45, I'm late. I'm like 9:30 because the traffic gets more and more, right? So let's say I'm used to leaving at 6:30 and I get into work at 8:45, you know, on a consistent basis. Okay, this is good. You know, I'm flexible. Yes, there's accidents from time to time and weather and all these contingencies, but generally speaking, that's roughly the time it takes me to go down to you know, the heart of the universe, Yonge and Dundas. So if this new system comes in and I abide by it, and I'm at work at 8:15, and I realize, wow, that's considerable. Then that's got to resonate with people. Think of the amount of money and the productivity and all of the chains of causal effects if you can just try to convince people this is really better for everybody. You know? And humans we know. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Frans de Waal at all. He's a primatologist. He's demonstrated very clearly that we have fairness detectors not only in humans but other primates as well.
Yes.
And so as long as people are fairly going along, we will detect cheaters, and we will not be happy with cheaters, especially if they're going to screw things up for like 50 to 100 people in that little congested area of whatnot, and you've got one person deciding, hey, I'm going to go this alone, and I'm going to try to take advantage of this. People will not like that. So it may lead to a self-policing effect, where in Canada, and I'm hopeful, because Canadians, by and large, worldwide, we're not bad in terms of, oh, there's a sale on this? Well, let's get in a line. Whereas if you're in Mexico City, it's not a queue at all. It's rush as fast as you can. You know, and then that's an ethnic thing. That's a different, you know, that's a geographical thing. But I thought in Canada, you know what? We've been so bloody polite for so long. You think we would be able to pull this off and demonstrate to the world that there's a fairly low-cost, cheap way to bypass complex systemic problems. And you know, I could be totally wrong on this. We're just getting up to the computer simulations now. And if they're a go, and if everything looks good, then we'll go on to a pilot project, and we'll see what happens after
It's
that.
almost like you're talking about self-organizing systems where we get better as a community to organize ourselves and follow something that makes sense, instead
Yes.
of going this way and that way. I'm fascinated because I think you're right. In some very simplistic ways, even how we dispose of our garbage, we could make some incredible changes.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. There's no question about
how do you see technology playing a role in all of this? Obviously, you mentioned, for example, if behavioral patterns and trends could be analysed historically, using chronicles of some sort,
Yes.
that we could identify when people could carpool, for instance, into the city or catch a bus because it makes sense to catch a bus.
Right.
What other ways do you think technology may integrate beyond the fact that it's a bot or it's a software program that does this fair use? It's a machine that brings together the data and makes sense of it and then spits out, examples of what we should be doing, where we should be aiming for. In what other ways do you think technology may influence this change?
Right. Do you mean in terms of like everybody has a cell phone,
Yes.
therefore they could use the cell phone
Yes.
then as like for the traffic thing? I thought there could be software set up that either uses a Doppler radar type of effect to measure the frequency of cars so as the cars compress, then that would feed signs 2 miles down the road saying, you need now go into this mode. You need to adopt these these principles now. Start doing that now. And then that would feed back, right? Or you could have things like, once you get into a certain area within a city's limit, the core downtown hub of a city, you have to tune to this particular frequency, this FM station, and it's going to tell you, and if you listen to what that thing tells you, what that modulated voice, automated voice tells you to do, maintain this speed, drive at this level, right? And you follow that, you will get through that area, right? So we already have stuff. We have smartphones, we have radios within the vehicles and that sort of thing. We might as well utilize those if we can, because it's fairly inexpensive to do that kind of stuff. The smart cars, that's easily, a decade away in terms of full on everybody jumping on board. And even those things, I'm not sure what to expect if in fact all the bugs will have been worked out, right? Because the last thing you need are catastrophic effects where a glitch goes wrong, and then people, consumers, and the public tend to get very, very nervous around having something take control, right? I mean, the book I'm writing now is called Flying Without a Pilot, and it not only speaks about the increasing trustworthiness humans are having for artificial intelligence to take over parts of their lives, it's also reflective of the human itself, so that if there's no soul or kind of pilot in the ship, and we are just the ship, then we are essentially a conglomerate of bits of information. People often don't like to hear that, and especially those who are religious, and I'm very sympathetic to them. And I don't wish to rock their world and disturb them, in a deeply foundational manner. I mean, I'm an atheist, but I'm a really nice atheist, And I'm very compassionate because I studied the evolution of religion, and I know how important it is to people, so I don't want to shake them up too much. But I do want people to take this very seriously, and that is, if humans, like computers, are very similar, that we work according to basic algorithms, and I think we do, then how are we going to interface ourselves with the technology so that the two are very, very compatible and work extremely efficiently, very pragmatically together? To me, that's the interface. That's where we have to make that connection. Whether you're a dualist, or you're a spiritualist, or you're religious, or you're non-religious, I think it behooves us as humans, as a species, to look better at what makes us tick and what makes our machinery tick, and figure out how we really what's the greatest efficacy in terms of interfacing us with that stuff? I tell my students all the time, you guys, whether you realize it or not, are living in a cyborg generation. I mean, let's face it, we can have so many artificial limbs. We're going to have artificial eyes, artificial ears. We're going to have all this technology. We have nanotech now, and we have, stem cell work as well. Your grandchildren will live in a world very different from what we're living in now, and that's only 50 to 100 years down the road. So I'm very hopeful to see the interface of technology and humanity come together. I am a transhumanist. I think we improve ourselves as our technology improves, and we, along with it, can develop with that technology. So in terms of smart systems, in terms of traffic, in terms of simply human behavior, I think it's really just a matter of determining how the functionality of the bits work at specific levels. And I just feel sometimes as though I'm kind of like from the future, and I'm waiting for the rest of the gang to catch up. I don't know if you feel like that yourself sometimes, where you see where we should be and where we could be, and how the world could be a better place. But there are these things that are standing in the way right now. Like, to me, as unsavory as it is to talk about pedophilia, and you just see my students just react whenever you just mention it. I say, what should we do with pedophiles? What should we do with them? And I ask them, invariably some will say, 2 behind the ear, just take them out and shoot them. Right, what else? Hang them, okay. Execute them, lock them up forever, never let them near kids. Wonderful, okay, these are all great ideas. And now the pedophile is your father, or your brother, or your son. Still feel the same way? They're humans. They do things we detest. There are facts in nature, and there are values in humanity. If we put great negative value on the actions of a pedophile, then how then, with our knowledge, should we then treat that person who is somehow incapable of abiding by the rules we have put in place as a society? Just kill them. So just kill them. What about germline mutations? Find the pedophile gene, rip it out of them. Should we do that? Like, we have the technology, and we're going in a direction where we can be far more compassionate to other people. We know we hate the actions of certain types of individuals because they cause great harm and suffering to others. Great. We know that. In my next book, the question is, how do we now change the laws and our sense of morality and our sense of ethics in order to best and most fairly deal with a person who just happened to have been born with a genotype that expresses for that type of behavior that doesn't measure up to our particular value system? Do we just punish them like we used to with kids with ADHD before we understood what that was? We call them brats, and in the 70s when I was in primary school, teachers would belt, they would hammer kids, they would strap them, put dunce caps on them, ridicule them, right? But now we know, oh, wait a minute, kids learn differently, kids have different genotypic and phenotypic expressions, we're way more complex than we thought we were. You can't just choose to be heterosexual, right? So, when I grew up as a Catholic, homosexuality was a sin. You couldn't be buried in consecrated ground. You could not go to heaven. My grade 6 teacher turned out to be homosexual. He had to marry. He had 4 kids. Now he's finally with his husband. He's happy. He's living the life he should have always been allowed to live, right? So the same thing in the future when it comes to law and legal and ethical systems. We know there are certain activities and behaviors of people we don't find favorable because of the amount of harm that they lead to. Fine. What's the most intelligent, compassionate way in which to deal with that person? And to me, have to make a determination that the person themselves have a certain level of choice in this. If you like having sexual activity with children, you must know in our society we cannot allow that. Therefore, if you persist in this, you have forced our hand in order to stop you from doing that. The question now is, how should we stop you from doing that? We can lock you away and never let you anywhere near children. We can do techniques that they're doing now, right? Chemical castration, pretty much take away a person's sex drive altogether. We can physically castrate the person. We can lobotomize them. I mean, there are so many things that have been done in the past that seem cruel and unnecessary. Or we can find out how the pedophile's neurochemistry differs from those who are not. I don't drink alcohol at all. I did when I was like 14 to 16, as a young adolescent, tough guy. You do that kind of thing. And then eventually it was just like, this tastes like shit. I don't like this stuff. And I've never drank since. So I've been the designated driver for my friends my entire life. And that's a good thing for them. Now, I go into a bar with a buddy of mine who's a recovering alcoholic. And I order a mango juice, and he orders a mango juice. Should I be praised? What for? It means nothing for me to do that. It means everything. He really wants alcohol. Why can't we look at the neurochemistry of alcoholics, pedophiles, people where their lives are being destroyed in ways that in many circumstances are beyond their control, and then use the technology we have to make a comparative analysis to try to get their neurochemistry to match more, in the case of an alcoholic, maybe more like mine, where I have apparent control over not wanting any alcohol. A lot of people say, oh, but you haven't tried this one. So you like it? No, it tastes like gasoline. It all tastes like gasoline to me. Why can't we just put me into an MRI and alcoholics in the MRI, get us to go through a series of processes of, behavioral triggers, right? Stimuli and various types of things. I know it's a crude, MRIs are crude, functional MRIs are crude instruments, but it's the best we've got right now. But to me, in the future, we should be able to have the capacity to see what makes the bits do what they do, in order to then say, do you really want to stop being an alcoholic? Right? Because let's face it, alcohol has ruined more lives than any other drug on this planet, and continues to do so. So I think we need to put a lot of attention into marrying our technology with our humanity. And I'm very hopeful that this is going to be the case, that we'll adopt a new paradigm, a new way of looking at humanity, so that we don't absolve people from their behavior. But to me, in the future, the best we're going to get in terms of accountability is for a person to be able to try to identify their behavior in terms of the machinery not working properly. So if you have a great desire to want to have sex with children, to be a moral agent and to be a legal civilian, a law-abiding citizen, it is the onus then befalls you then to look at yourself in relation to those standards that have been put up before you, and say, and my wife is in social work, and she's worked with kids who've been abused and with pedophiles, and they pretty much say the same thing. Lock me up for 10 years. The day I get out of prison, I'm right back doing what I want to do. Okay. So, how do we be compassionate, not only to the victims, obviously, but to the perpetrator who has whatever biochemistry is causing that person to behave in that way. And I do really hope that in the future we'll be able to see people as essentially I call it your systemic self. We are a conglomerate of systems. We operate under so many different types of systems. We need to be able to understand what our systemic self is. Why do I have no desire to have sex with children or men or animals? Why do I not desire alcohol? Why do I lead a relatively normal, morally just life? Why can I do that and others can't, right? And we have to look at all of the systems. Maybe if I lived in a different part of the world where the economy wasn't nearly what it is in Canada, and I had to steal and beg and borrow and do all kinds of horrific things just to feed my family, then an outsider like you and I might look at it and say, oh, that person is unlawful and they're immoral and whatnot. Yeah, but look at the systems under which they are now behaving. So I think in the future we have to find out what people's systemic selves are and treat them accordingly. I know that's complex, and I know people will try to abuse that. You know what I mean? They'll try to make themselves victims in order to exploit how it is we wish to act towards that particular person. But there will always be. That will always happen. People do that to welfare systems. People do that all the time, right? What I think is a more responsible way of dealing with humanity and using technology towards that end is to be able to find what I call the major causal clusters within a person's systemic activity that has led them to behave in that particular way, right? So that we might be able to even work out some software to be able to put values on the ways in which they've acted according to the systems in which they particularly find themselves. And that's if we want to be fair. Like I said, it may turn out that people don't want to be fair. That's too much work. That's, you know what I mean? It's we don't have the software. We don't have the memory. No. Let's just go back to the old way. And let's just hold people accountable for things that are beyond their control. Well, that's lazy and that's easy, and I find that to be unjust. And I'm talking about justice and fairness in similar ways to what Plato was discussing 2,300 years ago, but Plato didn't have the technology we do today. And to not use it. That's why I'm telling you, the majority of philosophers I don't waste my time with. Because they're still stuck back with Plato. They're still talking about, well, what do we think about justice? And a just man should be this. And they don't know anything about neuroscience. They don't know anything about cognitive evolution. They don't know anything about the systemic factors that make a person who and what they are at any given time. They think they've come out of a vacuum somewhere and they exist all ready-made, or that some still believe in the tabula rasa ideas, we just write on their brains and we go from there. And it's like, I don't want to wait for you people anymore. I want to push this. If we care about humanity, if we care about humans, and we're compassionate, and we want to treat them as fairly as possible, then we have to interface technology and ethics and law. Simple as that.
Well, you've given us so much to think about, and that question of law and human rights and what will change with computing, and I guess the symbiosis being proposed between humans and computing will impact human rights greatly, if we call it human rights in the future at all. I think as well, we place a lot of safety in the knowledge that technology will not fail us. However, I think we need to also think about cataclysmic failures in complex systems. We see them in space shuttles, we see them in a lot of things, and to place so much trust, I guess is the word, in machines may be our undoing. Who knows? We talked about this warning at the beginning of our discussion, but I'm eager, where we can exploit technology for good, that we do so. That's one of my fundamental backgrounds, looking at flooding systems and sensors and how that can help. But at the same time, I guess I like being human. I like thinking, at least, that I have control of my own decisions and choices, and what you touch on in your morning talk on free will, of course. And I do think I have free will. I do think I have choice. And it's okay to differ. I think, for me, this discussion is paramount. You mentioned universal ethics. I think that's paramount. I think we can't move ahead. We'll still have wars. We'll still have inequities. We'll have social exclusion. We won't have digital inclusion. And I think, as far as that is concerned, I'm very much in favour of what you said, surveying the different systems that are out there and plucking out those important elements which are innate to every main stratosphere of thinking, And it has to do with cooperation, fairness, and respect, and tolerance, and all those other. Do no harm is another one you mentioned in your talk. I don't disagree at all, even though I've got a deep belief as in a spiritual belief system. I don't think that doesn't disagree. I think with a lot of things you've said, I think we're congruent in how to make things better, and that's why I love papers like yours, where you nut out definitions, you talk about the next phase, and you talk about where are we headed with that, and what are the risks. You don't negate the risks. You actually come out and talk about what they are. So I thank you so much for this discussion. We could have spoken for another 2 hours if I didn't have people outside my office waiting for me. But I will follow your work for sure, and I hope after the special we could do some kind of post-analysis on some of the feedback we get to TNS Magazine. So thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Take care.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bye now.